Have you ever read F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby? Or maybe seen one of the 2 movies they made of it?
Some people believe that the author developed the character around one of Cincinnati's legends. George Remus was a lawyer, a pharmacist, a millionaire bootlegger, and a killer. The stuff good old-fashioned stories are made of. We showed you last week what led up to the murder of his wife Imogene, but his trial was one of the most famous in the century in Cincinnati. George Remus went stark crazy when his wife Imogene stole his bootlegging millions and then tried to divorce him. So he caught up to her in Eden Park about an hour before the divorce hearing and murdered her in broad daylight. He promptly went to the police and confessed, and the trial was one of celebrity. George Remus had the renowned lawyer Clarence Darrow testify on his behalf, as well as a list of who's who in law enforcement and politics.
It was a trial where people stood out on the streets, packed, waiting to see every day what happened, because they didn't have television in those days. They had radio, but very poor. It wasn't perfected yet.
The drama unfolded in Hamilton County Courtroom Number 2. The prosecutor was one Charles P. Taft, son of William Howard Taft. The jury was made up of 10 men and 2 women. Being a lawyer himself, Remus represented himself. He started out saying that he was sane and justified in murdering Imogene. But the law was against him, so he switched to insanity and presented a very convincing case.
And he took this vial of poison out of his pocket, and he shook it, and he drank it. It was actually poison. But he'd taken, being a pharmacist, he took something that enabled him to get by. He didn't even get sick. He was a little goofy, I think, at that time. Remus also had in his favor his first wife and their daughter. Lillian Krause, divorced by Remus for Imogene years before, fervently defended her ex.
She made his life so miserable. She made him a pauper. Why, George Remus wouldn't hurt a fly.
Despite expert testimony that George Remus was quite sane at the time of the murder, it was perhaps the blustery, unflattering testimony of his friends and colleagues that got him off.
He could be as solemn and sonorous as an archbishop, but when his wife and lover were mentioned, he would jump up like a man with a hornet in his pants.
He was a good citizen, but he was a very emotional man and somewhat unstable. His reputation as a...
Why, he actually tore them right off. Then he took off his shoes and threw them out the window. This fit lasted for hours and hours. He was insane.
And the jury agreed.
He had 4 attorneys, but he defended himself. And he did a good job, because after all, 6 months in a loony bin isn't a bad deal.
After his release from the insane asylum, Remus demolished his fabulous Price Hill mansion and subdivided the property. He lived another 24 years in relative obscurity and died at his Covington home. The man, born to a poor German immigrant family, may not have succeeded in crashing Cincinnati's high society, despite his one-time fortune of $80 million. But George Remus still made his mark on the century in Cincinnati. Now, there's some debate about whether or not George Remus died penniless. Some say he had nothing, while others say he had buried treasure on that site of his Price Hill mansion, and that he frequently traveled to Florida in his older years. A poor man could not have done that. Next week, the greedy and the deadly women of the century in Cincinnati.